On today's episode, we play a little fact or fiction with some common pieces of advice in the bass fishing world, and we talk a little bit about if and when you should use drag on a baitcaster, some top creek lures, and fishing around weed beds. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by the great folks over at American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. Whether you're in the market for a new rod, new reels, new line, baits, whatever you need, American Legacy Fishing should be the first place that you check for a few reasons. One, obviously they have a great selection of your favorite brands from Abu Garcia, Berkley, Fenwick, Dobbins, G. Loomis, Shimano, Daiwa, you name it, they've got it over there. They've got all your lines from Seaguar to Sunline to Power Pro. They've got an ever-expanding line of baits, and they have the internet's best selection of gently used fishing gear as well. So if you've had your eye on something, you just can't quite spring the money for it brand new, be sure to check their used page because they're updating it all the time with some great name brand gear that's very, very lightly used that you can pick up for a fraction of the cost of it brand new. All of that from a great family-owned Midwestern tackle shop right in Evansville, Indiana. So whether you're shopping online at AmericanLegacyFishing.com or stopping in their beautifully remodeled showroom right there in Evansville, the folks over at American Legacy Fishing are there and waiting to take care of you. So go check them out over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. Be sure to sign up for their email notifications because they're doing daily deals right now where they're giving you 20, 30, 40% off of great items that you can only really find out about if you subscribe to their email list, and you get a brand new deal every single day right now. So go check them out, AmericanLegacyFishing.com, and as always, you can use code TACKLETALK5. That's going to save you an extra 5% off regularly priced and sale items. Again, it's code TACKLETALK5 over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. Okay, folks, first thing up here today, we do have to recap the Major League Fishing Heavy Hitters event from the last probably week and a half or so. So this year's 2025 Heavy Hitters was held on Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia, May 17th through 22nd. So yeah, that was about a week and a half ago at this point because we had a great guest episode last week with our buddy Blake Paff over at Dark Corner Customs. So we're a little bit behind here, but we do really quickly need to hit kind of the main points here to catch you guys up to speed. So your top 10 from heavy hitters this year: 10th place, Michael Neal. 9th went to Jeff Sprague. 8th, Drew Gill. 7th, Matt Steffen. 6th place, Zach Burge. 5th, Edwin Evers. 4th, Cole Floyd. 3rd, Dustin Connell. 2nd, Justin Lucas, and 1st place, $100,000, Nick Hatfield. So congratulations to Nick Hatfield, the pro from Greenville, Tennessee, his first big win on the MLF Bass Pro Tour in dominating fashion on the final day. Now he had a little bit of a shaky time a couple days before that, kind of squeaked in, but he made it to the championship round and then basically led wire to wire on that final day. So that's the first part of this event. The big headline, your winner, Nick Hatfield. But if you don't know, Major League Fishing's Heavy Hitters event is one of the coolest events all year in terms of format, at least for me, I think. I love almost everything about this event, with the exception of some of the location choices that I feel like could be a little better because this is a big emphasis on big fish. You would like to see them go to a place where you can swing for, 8, 9, 10 pounders and have a realistic chance at it happening. That wasn't quite the case, obviously with Smith Mountain Lake, and we saw a lot of 5s and 6s and things like that. But almost everything else I really love about the Heavy Hitters event. And if you don't know, not every Bass Pro Tour angler actually qualifies for this event. In fact, I think only 30 qualify to actually fish in Heavy Hitters, and those 30 anglers are determined by the combined weight of their biggest fish at each of the 7 regular season tournaments from last year. So think about that. There are 7 stage tournaments a year, and at each stage, so stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Major League Fishing takes your biggest fish from that event and keeps track of it. And at the end of the year, you basically have a list of of your 7 top fish, one from each event. And the 30 anglers who have the total largest weight of those 7 fish from those 7 events qualify for heavy hitters. So that in and of itself is cool because it puts an emphasis on big fish throughout the year in a format that doesn't necessarily require you to catch a lot of big fish to win. We've seen that before. You can win a Major League Fishing stage event by just catching a lot of decent fish. So I like that they put that element in there to try and drive and motivate anglers to target those big fish to qualify for something like heavy hitters. So I think it just makes this tournament kind of like a pride thing for a lot of these guys. And then the format of the actual event itself is really cool too. So similar to most MLF BPT events, there are multiple days and qualifying rounds and then a knockout round and then a championship round. And scores reset, kind of the whole time. The whole MLF deal is taking place at heavy hitters as well. And yes, there is $100,000 on the line, just like normal for the winner. But here's the coolest part. They also pay some insane money for big fish on each day. So that motivates these guys that might not even be in competition to win anymore. They may have fallen behind. Still, you have the chance with one swing of the rod to have a huge payday. So in this event, every cast counts. So in the first 4 days, the qualifying rounds, MLF pays $10,000 for big bass. So that's a pretty nice payday on one single fish, I would say. And day 1, we had a tie. Dave Lefebvre and Fred Rabanus both caught 6 sevens. So they split $10,000, $5,000 each way. Day 2, we had another tie. Justin Lucas and Britt Myers both caught 5 fours. So they split $10,000. Then on day 3, no tie there. Nick Hatfield wins big bass with 5 pounds, 6 ounces. So he clears a clean $10,000. And then another $10,000 on day 4 goes to Cole Floyd. Now, after the qualifying rounds, here's where the big money comes in per bass. On the knockout round day, MLF pays $30,000 for big bass. And then in the championship round, it pays $100,000 for one single fish. And that's where you get some really cool moments. Think back like a year or two, Kevin Van Dam, on like the sunset moment of his historic career, he catches a $100,000 fish at Heavy Hitters. It was super cool. So you get those type of moments here at Heavy Hitters. Your knockout round big fish winner and $30,000 went to Matt Steffen. And then in the championship round, your $100,000 fish from this tournament went to Jeff Sprague with a 6-pound, 2-ounce tank.
He was able to do this right here.
Guys, that's a 5-pounder. That's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one. Come here, baby. Come here to me. Come here to me. Oh my gosh, look at that. Look at that, son.
A tank for Jeff Sprague.
Oh my gosh. Holy cow. Easy, baby. Holy cow. She is whooped up, boy. Look at her.
6 pounds, 2 ounces.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Look how beat up this big old female is. Her tail is almost gone. Look at that. That's what I don't even know what to say, guys. That's, oh my gosh. Oh, you beautiful, beautiful bass.
Jeff Sprague smashes a
Thank you, baby.
Smith Mountain Lake special of 6 pounds and 2 ounces.
Holy cow. In a matter of one cast, how your day just changes.
And that fish doesn't just change your day, that fish changes your life, right? That's a $100,000 check for one single fish. That's what a lot of people make in like 1 to 3 years of working 40, 50 hours a week. And you win it on one single fish. That's pretty cool. So congratulations to Jeff Sprague. Congratulations to Nick Hatfield. And that is your update from Smith Mountain Lake for the 2025 Major League Fishing Heavy Hitters. Okay, next up here today, I want to have a little bit of fun on today's episode. I want to do kind of our own little version of fact or fiction here today on the show. So very, very simply, I've got a handful of things I would probably call like common thoughts or, pieces of advice that you'll hear from people around fishing, really common things we've heard kind of our whole life. And we're going to do our best today to label them fact or fiction and tell you why I think so. Now, of course, with all of these types of things, there's nuance. So that's what makes this so tough, because I don't want to just say, oh, this one is kind of in the middle, or this one could be both. It's both ways. I want to try and actually pick one, fact or fiction. So is it going to be right 100% of the time? No, but I'm not going to give you like a wishy-washy answer here. Half the fun with these type of things is taking a stand and kind of backing up your opinion. So I'm going to try my best to go fact or fiction and tell you why. So let's stop lollygagging here. Let's get to the first topic we have here. And the first piece of advice we have is...
bass go deep in the summer.
Bass go deep in the summer. I'm going to say that is fiction. And hear me out on this one. So some bass do go deep in the summer. That's true. In fact, depending on your body of water, many bass might even go deep in the summer. But here's the thing. It's not some sort of like genetic rule for bass. It has a lot to do with how your lake actually sets up. So for instance, right now, I'm thinking of two lakes around here that I fish pretty frequently. Let's call them like Lake A and Lake B. So Lake A is essentially a giant bowl. If you live around Dayton, you know the lake I'm talking about. It's maybe like a mile or two long, maybe and like half a mile or a quarter mile across. It's right near downtown. It's a giant, clear, rocky bowl. Now, there's no tree cover at this lake. There's not much cover, if any cover, on the bank. There's no docks. There's no laydowns, really, not many anyway. And it's pretty much just like a rocky hole filled with water, and it has some okay bass in it. And then Lake B is almost the opposite. It's dirty. It's surrounded by a ton of overhanging trees. There's a few big laydowns that are pretty easy to find. There's a couple big rock points and flats, and it just has almost everything else that other lake does not have, but it's about the same depth. So in the summertime, those fish in that deep, clear, featureless lake, they do go deep. And I would say the heavy majority of those bass move out into the middle somewhere, and they just kind of stay there for most of the summertime. And the reasoning there probably is because it's their only refuge from the heat and the sun, and the only, quote unquote cover those fish actually have is deeper water. So that makes sense. Meanwhile, at the dirty lake, you have a lot of overhanging trees, a lot of laydowns, and there is a large population of those bass that do not go deep at all in the summertime. In fact, they stay very, very shallow because there's cover up shallow at that lake. Those overhanging trees, they provide shade and shade lines for them to use all day long. The laydowns around there provide cover for them to stay on and get out of the sun and kind of hide a little bit. The bigger points and ledges also provide shade at different times of the day, and there's just more escapes and reasonable places to keep them shallow in the summertime. So at that lake, there really isn't a big population of bass that moves, quote unquote deep once the summertime hits. They're much more, I would say, cover and structure oriented than depth dependent, I guess, if that makes sense. So it completely depends. Some lakes, they do. Some lakes, they don't. And same thing goes for like rivers and creeks. There are fish that hang out in the shallow, fast, highly oxygenated riffles and real shallow water in the outflows all summer long. Some of those fish do not fall back downstream to those like winter holes in the summertime where there's traditionally deep water. It seems like those river smallmouth are more about moving water and that fresh, cool, oxygen-rich type water. They seem to care more about that than depth. So I'm going to say that this is fiction. Do some fish move deep? Of course they do. But as a rule of thumb, I think anyway, it's way more dependent on your actual body of water and what type of cover is available to those fish, both shallow and deep. And that's going to determine whether the majority of those fish move deep in the summer or whether they just kind of stay in their sort of little homing areas, whether that be deep, mid, shallow, wherever that cover is. Okay, the next one here is going to be...
bluebird skies are bad.
Ooh, geez. This is going to put me right back, I think, in the same boat as the topic we just had. Obviously, for a little different reason, but I think the rationale is kind of the same. So I'm going to give this a fiction as well because it's pretty close to the same situation we just talked about. Bluebird skies don't make fish not bite. It just kind of spreads them out a little bit. So when it's cloudy, those fish just roam and move away from traditional cover more freely. So it gives you the illusion that the fishing is better because the fish are more widespread. Where when you've got bluebird skies, those fish are still there and they still eat, but they're more highly concentrated in those particularly covered spots. So under docks, under pads, in the weeds, in laydowns, they're under overhanging trees, your typical shaded covered areas. So I think we've hit this point pretty well at this point by now. I don't need to kind of drone on this, but I certainly think this one probably falls in that same category. I'm going to call it fiction. Bluebird skies are not bad. You just have to adapt to those conditions. Okay, our next one here is going to be...
Big baits typically catch bigger fish.
Okay, so this is one right off the bat I can get behind, and I think it's probably because of how it's worded. Big baits typically catch bigger fish. That to me is a fact. I'm going to go fact versus fiction on this one because the word typically gives me the opening here to talk in like averages or probability. And over my lifetime, if I throw a 7-inch glide bait and then I throw a 2-inch Ned rig, quantity aside, like we're not talking about numbers of fish, my average size of fish will probably be larger with the 7-inch glide than it would with the 2-inch Ned. That's a fact for me. Over my lifetime, if I put every picture side by side of a fish that I've caught on a giant glide bait and every fish that I've caught on a 2-inch Ned rig, there's going to be bigger fish in the glide bait pictures. So when you think per fish, I think you're going to get a bigger quality on those bigger baits. Now, I've even seen it with like a variation of, like a 2.5 and a 3.5 inch paddle tail swim bait. My favorite swim baits, Big Joshies, come in 2.75 and 3.25. And my average fish on the 3.25 is definitely bigger. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't catch tanks on the smaller one and that you can't catch dinks on the bigger ones, because you can. I've done both of those plenty of times as well. But again, over time, it seems like the bigger a bass is, the bigger bait it will at least try to consume. Now, the one little equalizer on this point is going to be treble hooks, because with a treble hooked bait, a fish does not have to try and eat that bait. They just kind of have to get aggressive and sort of swipe at it. So glide baits, jerk baits, harnessed swim baits, whopper ploppers, deep crank baits, those are all baits that can be big in profile, but a fish doesn't necessarily have to get it in its mouth to get hooked. All you got to do is make that fish aggressive enough to kind of chase or even just nip at that, and it can get hooked. But all I'm going to say is if you did an actual study, and that would be awesome, by the way, if anybody's listening to this that's way smarter than we are, and you want to do an actual research project, this would be a really cool one. It would be cool to see the average lure size compared to the average catch in a controlled environment. But I would be willing to bet you would see a correlation between bait size and fish size over a large enough sample size. So I'm going to go with fact on this one. Bigger baits typically, and that's the key word here, typically catch bigger fish. Okay, our next one here is going to be...
Big bass are dormant in cold water.
No hesitation on this one. I am going
bass
fiction.
Are a line shy.
Fiction. Bass are not dormant in the wintertime or in cold water. And you'll hear that a lot. And I'm kind of guilty of this sometimes too, by just kind of defaulting to, sometimes saying that bass are lethargic in the cold. And that can be true. Their metabolism does slow down. It is a little bit of science there. And then they're less likely to be as aggressive or to as actively chase something for an extended period of time. But there is a big difference between a slight to moderate change in temperament and dormancy. And some people, I think, get it in their brain that these fish basically just hibernate down there all winter time, and there's nothing you can do really to, get them to bite, and they just sort of sit there. That's just not the case. They will eat. they will feed. They just don't have to eat as much to sustain themselves, which in turn means they don't need to chase bait so aggressively. So I like to think of it as making those fish eat smarter. I think that's a better way to look at this. Fish in the wintertime can be harder to catch for sure, but it's for a variety of different reasons. One, obviously, being that they're cold-blooded creatures, which means that their body temperature goes down as the water temperature goes down. Their body temperature is not regulated internally, so it just kind of follows the water temp. So that, by nature, does slow them down a little bit. The second thing there is that the lower body temperature means less exertion and less activity, meaning less food is needed to sustain them for that period of time. So we obviously have that working against us too, but then there's some weird things that just kind of stick out about that time of year. Like around here, the water generally gets clearer in the wintertime, so that's why these fish need something like a really slow jerk bait in the wintertime. Slow so that they don't have to put a lot of effort into tracking that bait down or really chasing it to eat it, but also something like a jerkbait is pretty darn realistic, and even in really clear water where they're very slow and they're just getting up and kind of nosing on that bait and getting a really good look at it, it still looks pretty real. It's not one of the weirder looking baits that we throw as bass anglers. If there was a bait that you have to let a fish go up and get a pretty good look at, a natural looking jerkbait is a pretty good one to do it. But then even in like moving water situations like creeks or rivers, you have, again, an equalizer in current. So that can keep those fish more active in the wintertime. A warm day in the wintertime can warm that water temperature up, a few degrees, especially if you're in somewhat shallow, clear water. So you can get those fish a little bit more frisky on just like a nice little warm spell of a couple days. There's all kinds of things that go into it. I don't think it's as simple as saying bass are dormant in the wintertime. For me, if I have to pick fact or fiction, I'm going fiction on that one. Okay, and our last one here is going to be...
Bass are line shy.
How do I want to go here? No matter how I answer this, I feel like a lot of people are going to agree and a lot of people are going to disagree. But I'm going to go fiction on this one as well. If you made me choose fact or fiction, bass or line shy, I'm going to go fiction. And as a general rule, I really think line shyness might be one of the most overrated and unnecessarily worried about things in fishing, for most of us regular anglers anyway. So the simple fact is that if a fish was going to get a good look at almost any lure, the line would probably be one of the least not realistic looking things about that bait. Like, give me any lure. Give me like a jig, just like a regular old flippin' jig. Do you really think that jig, a hunk of lead with powder paint on it, attached to a giant, sharp, shiny, metallic hook, surrounded by 200 individually cut strands of silicone sticking out of this thing like a koosh ball, with a Chuck E. Cheese prize-looking plastic crawfish on the back of it? Do you think that if a fish gets nose to nose with that bait and tries to analyze it, the one thing that is going to give that bait away as not being a real crawfish is the 0.1 millimeter, 1/10 the width of the lead on a pencil piece of string sticking out a little bit further than the other 200 way thicker strands of clearly fake silicone off of it? I don't know. I just don't buy that it's that important to hide the line when there's so many other things that look so unnatural about that bait. You could do that with anything. Do that, again, we talked about earlier, even one of the most realistic looking baits, a 110 size jerk bait, in ultra clear water. One, that fish is probably coming from behind that bait and it's tailing it, so it's probably not even seeing the line anyway. But even if it wasn't, do you think, again, that 0.1 whatever millimeter clear strand of line is going to give that bait away? Or do you think it might possibly be the 3 giant metallic treble hooks hanging from the belly of that supposed shad with 3 O-rings just clanking around all over each other, and all of that metal reflecting the living crap out of any bit of light that could possibly be hitting that bait? I don't know about you, but if there's something that's going to turn that fish off, I'm going to go with the 3 giant treble hooks over the barely visible piece of string. And I know there are people in your car or at work or whatever that are sitting there listening to this and saying, but Andrew, I've fished ultra clear water before and I've seen, bites on fish where they wouldn't hit 12-pound leaders, but they would hit a bait that was on an 8-pound leader. For certain situations, for like uber clear, deep smallmouth that are super pressured or something, yeah, I'm sure there are variables like that come into play, but you listening right now now about to go fish your, slightly stained residential pond for largemouth or whatever, I really, really think there are other things that we should be thinking about that matter a little bit more than that tiny piece of string. So something that like almost never gets talked about. What about like the scent or the oils that are coming off your hands when you're handling that bait? I would probably venture to say that the oils and the scent that your hands secretes as you manipulate this bait and you rig up your trailer or you retie your jig or whatever, I would bet that that has a bigger impact on fish sometimes than this tiny piece of line. But I just feel like we overplay the line thing compared to all the other variables that we should be taking into account. So I don't know. I'm going to go fiction here on this one too. As a rule, are bass insanely line shy? I don't think so. Okay, so there you go. That's a little bit of fun there. There's a little bit of fact or fiction. Let me know if you agree or not. I'm sure there are plenty of you listening that disagree with some of the takes on that one. But figured we'd have a little fun and just kind of break it down and not just give like a, oh, here's my hot take on this, but really try and back it up a little bit and just kind of a peek behind how I rationalize some of these things. And, sometimes I think we just really blindly follow conventional wisdom and things we've heard for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And sometimes when you stop and think about it, you can kind of see the other side of that argument pretty easy. And again, for the 10,000th time here on Tackle Talk, this is the fun part about bass fishing, is that there are very, very few absolutes in bass fishing, and almost everything is up for debate because we have no true idea what a fish is thinking at any given time, what works and what doesn't, whether it was actually the right choice or whether it was luck or a little bit of both. Again, that's the fun part about bass fishing. Okay, and finally here, let's get to a couple mailbag questions to close out the show here. The first question today is going to be from Drew, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, thanks as always for putting out the flat-out best bass fishing podcast out there, and congrats on the Shoalie. My question is, do you do anything with your drag on bait casters? Obviously, with spinning reels, drag management is a core skill, but it's not something I hear talked about much when it comes to bait casters. Personally, I do tend to mess with my drag a little bit on my casting reels. For instance, my frog reel is always all the way up tight, but messing with your drag doesn't seem to be that common. Would love your thoughts. Thanks and tight lines, Drew." Drew, when it comes to bait casters, I kid you not, I'm not joking here. If you go in my garage right now and you pick up any one of my bait casters, every single reel is locked down as tight as it will go. No exceptions. My drag is completely locked down. My frog rod, locked down. My Texas rig and my jig rod, locked down. My jerkbait rod, locked down. My crankbait rod, all locked down. I don't own a single bait caster whose drag is set to any other setting other than, holy crap, this thing better not slip even if I hook like a car underwater or something. That's the setting I go with. On a scale of 1 to 10, my reels are probably set to 11. Because if I ever need even an ounce of drag, I just disengage the thumb bar and I thumb that spool myself, because that basically gives you a manual, real-time responsive drag system. God gave you the best bait casting drag system money can buy, and it doesn't cost you a dime. You were born with it. Your thumb is the best drag for a bait caster. I can push down super hard or click it back if I don't want it to move at all, and then disengage it again and thumb the spool to any level of drag that I need. I can do all of that versus just being stuck with one constant amount of drag that might be too much or too little at any given moment with like a weird run that fish does or something silly. So if I want to horse that fish in and get it to the side of the kayak, great. My reel's locked down. I can do that. But if it starts acting squirrely or trying to dig or dive right there under the boat, okay, click the thumb bar, let it run for a little bit, keep your thumb on the spool, keep pressure on it, and then click it back to engage it and keep fighting. I just feel like I'm in control with the thumb bar method versus the regular drag on my reel. If a spinning reel could do that and the way that the ergonomics set so that your thumb could be used for tension on the spinning reel spool too, I would do that as well, but that's just not how spinning reels are designed. With a bait caster, it is how they're designed. So it's a great way to make sure that I don't ever have too much or too little drag because I'm doing it firsthand. It's just like casting. Yes, there are reels out there that you can set so that you can cast without using your thumb. Guarantee you I can make more accurate, faster, better casts by just backing my brakes down and using my thumb, because again, it's much more responsive than a one-size-fits-all braking system, or in this case, a one-size-fits-all drag setting that you have to choose while you're fighting that fish. I also don't want to mess with my drag while I am fighting that that fish because to mess with the drag, I have to take my hand off of the handle. I don't want to do that. With the thumb method, I never have to take my hand off that handle. I have complete control of my handle and my spool. I love it. So that's what I do for drag systems on my bait casters. Okay, the next question here is from Aaron. He says, "Hey, Andrew, I love the podcast. All the tips and techniques you've talked about on here have really helped me become a better angler after fishing for more than 25 years. I recently have gotten into small creek fishing. My go-to lure for that is the Rebel Crick Hopper in yellow. What are your go-to lures if your popper or your buzz grub is not getting the job done in a small creek?" Oh, now you're speaking my language, man. Tiny water. Okay, I'm going to think what I would probably just throw in a really quick bag if I just had to take like a couple things with me and I was going to go fish just about any creek around here. I would say first off, a deadly bait that's very slept on, the Mepps Black Fury inline spinners, a great little creek bait. Next here, I'm going to go, let's see, you've already got the Rebel. You said no buzz grub, no popper. So that means next, I guess, for me is going to be a Ned rig, just a regular exposed hook Ned rig, nothing fancy, just a little jig head with like a half bitten off Senko on it, the OG Ned rig. I'm taking it with me. I'm also going to take like probably a 3 or 4 inch grub on just a regular ball head jig, catches everything in the world in those creeks. A lot of times in creeks, you're dealing with multi-species situations, so catch a little bit of everything on that. Then I'm going to go with like a 3/16 ounce finesse jig of some sort with like a really tiny craw on the back. So that could be like a snack craw, that could be a Christie craw with most of the body bitten off of it, something like that, a little zoom chunk. All of those are great options. And then for a top water, I guess I'll go, if you've already taken buzz grub and popper off there, I would go with like a 75 size whopper plopper or a Chapo maybe. Those are fun little creek baits. And then I would probably throw like a belly weighted beaver or a creature bait of some sort, like a little sweet beaver on a belly weighted swim bait hook. That's super fun. A very weedless presentation for you to kind of flip around and not have to worry about getting snagged. Those are probably my top 6 right there. If I have to take out like a Rebel, craw or a crick hopper, which you've already got. And then we're taking out the buzz grub and the popper. So I'm going to go Mepps Black Fury. I'm going to go Ned rig. I'm going to go a 3 or 4 inch grub on a ball head. I'm going to go 3/16 ounce finesse jig. I'm going to go 75 size plopper or Chapo, and then a belly weighted little creature bait of some sort. Those are going to be my 6. Okay, and last question here is from Malachi. And he says, "Hey, Andrew, I'm an angler and a high school graduate out of Minnesota and have been listening to your podcast for a while. I wanted to say how much I really enjoy and have learned a lot from your episodes every Tuesday. One of the things that you really have opened my eyes on is when you bring biologists on to talk about research that they've conducted. I wanted to say thanks for those episodes. It really opened my eyes, and now I'm planning on going to college this year to pursue a career in fisheries biology." That's super cool. My question for you is, what kind of things are you looking for when fishing deeper water, specifically on lakes in the summer? I have a kayak, and one of my biggest weaknesses is trying to figure out how to catch fish when they transition to deep water, but specifically weed lines and grass flats. I've started to gain a little bit of confidence fishing these areas, but I can't seem to totally figure it out, and I eventually make my way back to the shallows. The majority of the water around here is clear where I live, and I'm fishing these weed flats and weed lines. Everything seems to be the same, and I'm not quite sure how to effectively pick it apart. Thanks so much for all you do, Malachi. Hey, Malachi. Well, first off, super cool you're going to school for fisheries biology, and maybe this, silly little podcast had something to do with it. That's awesome. I'm definitely jealous. I wish I would have found, a passion like that early on. And if I would have known that fisheries biology was a thing, that's probably the route that I would have gone to. So congratulations. Best of luck to you. Very, very cool career choice there. But it's funny you ask about the weed lines and the weed flats and all that kind of stuff, because I just got back from taking the kayaks up to Lake Erie over Memorial Day weekend. Ryan and I, we went in just kind of blind and we tried to figure some stuff out in a new area to us, but a pretty popular area of Lake Erie. And we ended up doing pretty darn well. But one of the things that everybody else was doing was bed fishing and going super shallow for these fish and sight fishing and stuff like that. But I found on the second day a really fun bite in about 14 foot of water with the fish just buried in these long weed beds. And the really weird thing was I couldn't get them to hit anything off the bottom, and they didn't want anything ripped out of the weeds. They wanted nothing to do with either of those. But I finally figured out that there were fish in there because I could get some of them to shoot out of the weeds to hit like a small 110+1 jerkbait, worked just above the top of those weeds in that grass. So that jerkbait was probably like, I don't know, maybe 1 foot above the top of the weed bed. So, if I was in 14 foot of water, I bet the weeds came up maybe 3 or 4 feet. So then I had a jerkbait that dove down to about 9 feet. So it was about 1 foot over the tippy top of those weeds. And every few casts, I would have one of those smallmouth shoot out like a rocket at that jerkbait. Now, I had electronics, so that's the only way I was able to see what was going on and really try and figure them out. But I would say probably every, third or fourth fish would actually come out of the weeds and take a swipe at it at least. A lot of them shot out of the weeds. They would go up and get what I'm assuming is too good of a look at the jerkbait or get too close to the kayak, and they'd turn back away. But those fish wanted nothing to do with the more traditional weed and, vegetation lures that I would normally throw. A rattle trap, ripping that through the weeds. They didn't want that. They didn't want a jig being swam through the weeds. I tried that too. They didn't want a minnow bait down there shaking like a lot of people do. I tried that. And if my jerkbait was too high above the weeds, they wouldn't come out for it. It had to be within like a foot or two of the top of that grass. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just a weird thing that day or so. I don't know how long that bite lasts. I don't know why they wouldn't come up any farther than that, but that's what I was watching happen over and over again. So we had a pretty darn good pattern going, and this was the very specific thing that they wanted. I could get them to come out of the weeds, like the weeds you're talking about, with something that was very close to the top that they didn't have to shoot out too far for. So for you, I'd kind of take the approach that I did. I would try to fish those weeds in the 3 ways that I know how to fish weeds. So you can either fish in them on the bottom, you can fish in them with a moving bait, or you can fish above them. Those are really kind of your 3 choices. And certain days may be different. Maybe if I go back there tomorrow, they'll eat a jig or they'll eat a trap. I don't know. But you basically can fish in the weeds on the bottom, in and out of the weeds with a reaction bait, or fish above the weeds. That's where I'd start. If there's weeds there probably are bass there somewhere chilling around. It's just a matter of how do you target them? What will they eat on that specific day? And do you have the patience to try and lure them out? All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate you all. As always, go find us on the internet, tackletalkpodcast.com. Shoot me an email if you want to chat, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.